Dan McLaughlin, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
I like talking to Dan. Dan's super smart, and he writes for the National Review, and I think it's always valuable when he comes on the show to provide his insights. On top of that, on top of writing for a national level publication, he's also an expert in many of the things that he writes about, or he has expert opinions that he brings in and processes. So we're really fortunate to have Dan on the show. I wanted to have you come on and talk a little bit about this leak with the Supreme Court. We can get into the topic of abortion and maybe, slippery slope stuff later, but let's just start with the integrity of the court. And I also want to sprinkle in some responsibility of Congress. Like if we're worried about these things, why doesn't Congress act federally to create legislation? So I guess, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, the leak is a very big deal, and the court has had, little leaks before, hints, suggestions of where things were going, and of course, the court has had, after the fact breaches of its deliberations before, where journalists are able to get the story of how some case developed, and to some extent, there's nothing terribly wrong with some of that, the after the fact stuff, but having an entire opinion leak, a draft before, and I'm going to apologize to your viewers here, by the way. I'm somewhat under the weather, so if I'm coughing or otherwise in bad shape here, I'm just trying to get through this because the common cold is back.
Yes, it is.
Now that we're all out in society, right? So, but an entire opinion leaking has not happened in modern times. I think it might have happened once back in the 1850s or something. But and in fact, leaks have been associated typically with the court's lowest moments. I mean, the Dred Scott decision, they had all kinds of back channel leaks and pressure from the incoming president. But it is a very big deal because the court takes very seriously the idea that stuff has to be hashed out in private, and that drafts are not final, and that you can stake out a position, and then maybe it has to be trimmed back a little bit to get somebody else's vote or to keep somebody else's vote. Maybe you in your first draft, as careful as you are, you overstated a little something that comes in for some criticism. And it's one thing to do that on Twitter where you're like, oh, and then you got to you find yourself digging yourself in, as we often see people do because they said something in public. The whole idea is that the court's supposed to get it right, and deliberation over time is part of, it's a big part of what we want from the judicial temperament, because judges are just like anybody else, right? They have gut reactions. They have split-second decisions. And the idea is that particularly when you're dealing with making permanent law for the country, you want to mull over this stuff for a period of months and make sure you've thought through all the angles. And so leaking the drafts is bad news.
Yeah, it's bad news. There's no escaping that the court is politicized. We talk about what we think the decisions are going to be. We don't spend much time actually understanding the court, the nature of it, the history of it, how justices like Frankfurter or whatever impacted upon what the court is. We just talk about the very here and now, the thing that we care about. And then if we don't get what we want to expand the court or, fantasize about the next justice is about to retire. All of these things come into play. But what do we not know about the court in general? Because we don't spend time studying it. We don't spend time reading dissents or opinions in general. What do we need to know that we don't know about the court?
Well, of course, what we really don't know about the court, and what even a lot of the clerks don't know necessarily, what nobody really knows outside of a handful of people, is what happens when say Roberts and Kavanaugh sit down in a room together and discuss kind of the horse trading. What do I need to say to get you on this opinion, that kind of a thing. And often I think the justices don't always know what each other are doing, but in terms of for the outside look of sort of your ordinary citizen who doesn't read all the slip opinions as they come down, I mean, the justices do take the law very seriously. They take very seriously the idea that written opinions are supposed to be persuasive. They're supposed to persuade your colleagues. they are supposed to persuade the future, right? Because how does an opinion, why do some opinions get settled to the point where nobody challenges them anymore? And why do others come in for decades of attack and criticism? And it's not just because they are on controversial issues, it's because they're not persuasive. Um, I think if the anti-abortion movement in the 70s was really and truly persuaded that Roe was grounded in the Constitution, they would have been agitating much harder for the Human Life Amendment. If you really think, there are subjects in our constitutional law that are settled and unpopular, right? There are people who think that, we ought to get rid of the 22nd Amendment and allow presidents to serve 3 terms, right? But the 22nd Amendment is really settled. Nobody says that there's a way around it, right? So when people want to get rid of it, they agitate for an amendment. And there's a number of subjects like that where people recognize that, okay, we can't get this issue won in the courts, so we have to try to change the Constitution, which is fine. That's the framers designed it that way. But Roe was not persuasive. It was not persuasive even to liberal scholars at the time, who kind of were like, what is this thing? This is not law. This is just the court kind of handing down stone tablets from the mountain. And they didn't get it from the man upstairs. So I think and another thing is that, what the court has, since Scalia in particular, and not just Scalia, but, I think since Scalia came along roughly in the mid 80s, I think you have seen a great improvement in the scholarly care that the court puts into opinions. That he really challenged them to take their game up, to pay more careful attention to the text and the history, not to just kind of, wing it as much as, a lot of the 60s and 70s opinions. There was a lot of winging it. And the court was taking too many cases in those days. So, I think again, that's the matter of deliberation. You take too many cases, you're rushing some of them out without the proper care. And you see that even if, if you read like Bush versus Gore, excuse me, or some of the other cases that the court decided on a very tight time frame, they don't, they look a little more rushed. They don't show the same level of rigor that you see when the court has a few months to do its work.
By creating this link and compromising the integrity of the court, we still don't know. We should be able to find, it's a closed system, a closed community. We should be able to put our fingers pretty squarely on where the leak at least originated from, if not the actual person. There's a lot of speculation left and right. You've written a great piece kind of laying a lot of this stuff out with a lot of detail. What's your sense now that we're a couple of days past that piece? Do we have a better idea of which camp it's from? And is it Republicans? Is it Democrats? Is it somebody else with a different motive? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is a whodunit, and we don't really know anything more concrete. Right? We know a few things that are concrete. We're pretty sure that the leaked opinion that it went to presumably either Josh Gerstein or Alex Ward, the two Politico reporters who reported it. Now, it's possible that it was given to one of them by an intermediary. I think Ward might be the likelier candidate, actually, because he's not a legal reporter, right? So what's he even doing on the byline? But you never know. That could be a staffing issue internal to Politico. But it is entirely possible he came to them through an intermediary. Now, the opinion is a printout. It clearly was somebody printed, took the printout and gave it to the Politico reporters, and they scanned it. You could tell that visibly on the thing. It seems to have been printed from a color laser printer. Now, the investigators, if they're serious about their job, that will do a lot to help them narrow the field. There are some signatures that printing experts can tell the signature of a particular printer. And even aside from that, you could start narrowing it by the fact that, look, not everybody has a color printer. Not every chambers, not every office or chambers in the court building has a color printer. Some, that varies by whether you're in the justice's office or different clerks' offices. And so, we have that. The harder question, the much more contested one, is motive. Now, again, we don't know for a fact that this was leaked by someone inside the court. It could easily be that somebody, particularly in this work from home environment, a clerk or a justice or somebody, or a secretary even printed it out at home, least less likely a secretary. But that somebody printed it out at home or brought a copy home and their roommate, spouse, adult child, whoever picked up the copy and decided to be the leaker. And it's, it is even technically, it is certainly possible that some conservative clerk printed this out and their progressive roommate decided to leak it. So even if they're able to pin down the source of the print job, it's entirely possible that the actual leaker might be somebody of slightly different different political persuasion. But I mean, I think the most logical inference here, though, is that it is somebody who is, a young progressive, angry at the idea of overturning Roe. I think that maps with the kind of person who would do this, in terms of the kind of the ethos prevailing in the law schools these days.
Yeah.
And it certainly maps with the idea that, unleashing publicity about this before it's all done seems like a way to generate kind of mob fury in a way that somebody might think could, if you're the sort of person who's accustomed to changing the decisions of, say, law school deans by sending a crowd to their office, you might think that is also going to work on, Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah. Is that going to work on Brett Kavanaugh?
I don't think so, but you never know. I mean, Donald Trump, who is a shrewd judge of human character in his own very animal way, was asked not long ago about, I think it was about what if he went to war and or was asked to go to war, and he was kind of like, well, you really don't know until you're in there, which actually I thought was an unusually self-reflective view on Trump's part, but.
Yeah.
But, he's right about that. Like, you don't really know until you're in the fire what you will stand through and what you won't. I mean, we know with Kavanaugh, what we saw with Kavanaugh during his hearings. I mean, in Kavanaugh, I'm referencing Kavanaugh because the general theory, the conventional wisdom is that of the 5 who are likely to be voting for Alito's opinion, he might be the one who might be most inclined to say, for various kind of institutionalist reasons, well, maybe we shouldn't do this. Although he certainly sounded at the argument like he was ready to overturn Roe. But I mean, what we saw of him at his hearing certainly is that he's a guy who, when he got his back against the wall, he sort of stood and fought.
Mm-hmm. When you think about securing sources, I mean, look, I've got a mass comm degree. We learned all about the people that would protect their source. Are these 2 authors the kind of guy also feet to the fire? Hey, listen, you're going to be in contempt of court if you don't tell us who released this thing. Are these guys willing to sit there for indefinitely until they? I mean, will either of these guys do that?
I don't think that the court will put them to that because, first of all, the investigation is currently being conducted by the Marshal of the Supreme Court, who is actually a former JAG lawyer. She's a colonel in the Army. Has only joined the court like a year ago, spent decades in the JAG Corps. I don't know what her experience with conducting these kind of investigations is, but my guess is if she was the head of the national security division at the JAG Corps, she probably has pretty good experience, at least on the defense side, if nothing else, with sensitive information leak investigations.
Right.
But I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to want, even if they bring in FBI people to help her investigation,
Sure.
ultimately the call is with the Chief Justice. He runs the court. As an administrative leader, he runs the court. I can't see Chief Justice Roberts deciding to drag 2 reporters in there and throw them in the clink for not giving up their sources. I think he recognizes that would be a bad look for the court. And yeah, you could, if this was a serious national security thing, you could do that. And but these guys would be heroes to the press if they stood up to that. And he knows that.
This is a pretty big deal, though. I mean, this is undermining the foundation of one of our, 3 branches of government. It's a pretty big deal.
Oh yeah, it's a very big deal, and it's it's something that the court will look back on years from now as one of its kind of moments of truth, right? I mean, the way you look back at, I mean, I think Bush v. Gore was in a lot of ways the biggest crisis of the court in our lifetimes, because they found themselves in the position where they ended up with, no choice but to resolve the presidential election, and they felt they had no choice because they felt like the alternative to that was letting the Supreme Court of Florida do it. But clearly, they all hated being in the middle of that thing,
Yeah.
and went out of their way not to be in the middle of 2020, even when people were trying to get them involved.
They definitely sidestepped that. I mean, there's a pretty powerful dissent written by Judge Justice Thomas about that. Like, if not now, when do you get to hear this thing, right? Like that. And I'm very, very much simplifying what he wrote, but you're absolutely right.
No, he was complaining about the idea that wait, it's premature to decide this stuff before the election, and it's too late to decide it after. Like,
yeah.
I mean, his argument really was, look, we should. The best time to do this is in a case afterwards that doesn't affect the election, but somebody still has a live case where we can just lay down some rules of law, because that's what their job really is laying down the ground rules so other people can follow them later.
And not to sidetrack the conversation, but again, since we're talking about the Supreme Court and getting involved in things, they absolutely sidestepped you're using the precedent of Bush v. Gore and the handling of ballots. They certainly were creative in sidestepping that as well. I mean, we have a ballot problem. I'm not saying that anybody did or didn't get elected. I'm just saying that the integrity of the election has been undermined in part because the court didn't choose to step up and play its role in that.
Yes and no. I mean, some of the ballot security issues, ballot integrity issues, are things that really are up to the legislatures, and it's just the court's job to, say, okay, what are the range of permissible choices you're allowed. I think where they needed to get involved was when, like, you had state courts just running around throwing out the work of state legislatures.
Right.
Things like just unilaterally changing the deadlines. That's much more within the court's wheelhouse than examining a stack of ballots.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's get back on this case then. So why is a leak important in terms of it being a bad thing to undermine the credibility of the court?
Well, look, even in the democratic process, right, certain things we want presidents and Congress to be able to do, at least their initial preparations behind closed doors. But, we do want presidents to be subjected to public pressure. We do want Congress to be subjected to public pressure. We do want, Nancy Pelosi famously got broiled for saying about, about the bill, like you got to pass it to find out what's in it, right? And she was kind of saying more that, like, the voters won't really know what's in it until they see it in action, rather than saying that the members of Congress didn't even know what they were voting on. But the point still stands that, like, when Congress is considering a big piece of legislation, we want the public to have some idea what's in it and put pressure on them. And we just don't want the court to work that way. I mean, the court's job is not to be a democratic body. The court's job is actually to carry out democracy, right?
Right.
How does democracy work? Well, we elect people and they write laws. They write stuff down. And then the judges read what's been written down. So, the reading of what's been written down is just as much an important part of democracy, but it's not supposed to be a second round, sort of second bite at the apple where voters who weren't happy with what Congress did get to go lobby the court to read it some other way.
There's a lot in this. Boy, there's a lot in this. I mean, if it is not uncommon for people to think that Roe v. Wade is a piece of bad and questionable law, right? And that could be assailable. Well, why didn't any one of the Congresses in the last 50 years just take this on and tighten it up, or do their damn job and write a better law? I mean, what are we? We've been fighting politically about this for 50 years. If the legislators had stepped up and improved that legislation on their own, maybe This isn't
Well,
a
but that's the problem though. Is that that's why the court has to do this though? Is because this isn't because it's not a law, right? Because it's not some statute passed by Congress, right? Because if the Supreme Court screws up, if they pick up the Sherman Antitrust Act,
yeah
and they read it in some way that is weird, um, which they've been known to do,
yeah
Congress can step up. Congress can say, you know what, we're going to pass the, X amendment to this thing. There was a famous case, the Lilly Ledbetter Act, right?
mm,
Remember this? This is a couple of years ago. It's about 10 years ago now, I guess, 10, 12 years ago. Supreme Court decided a case about statutes of limitations in, I think, sex discrimination employment cases. So Congress didn't like it.
yeah
Obama didn't like it. Ginsburg wrote a dissent saying, wait a minute, we got this wrong. Congress should fix this. And they did. They passed an act to change the way the statute was read. That's fine. But so the court didn't need to go back and fix that, regardless of whether you think the court was right or wrong.
right
Congress thought that they were wrong and they changed it. But when it's the Constitution, right? Because that's what they did in Roe. They screwed up the Constitution. Well, if they screw up the Constitution and take a decision away from the elected bodies, right? Because Roe took away the laws of like all 50 states, swept them all off the books at once. Well, the only way to fix that, you got to pass an amendment through Congress. You need 3/4 of the states. That's a much higher bar, and so and this is exactly why the court is more willing to overrule its own decisions in constitutional cases, because they recognize, and Alito talks about this in his draft opinion, they recognize that it's really hard to amend the Constitution. And if the court has gotten something wrong, even if it's wrong for, a year, or if it's wrong for half a century, it is their job to go back and fix it. And that's, that's very famously what they did in Brown versus Board of Education.
yeah
Right. That decision had been on the books for 58 years. Plessy versus Ferguson, the case that allowed, sort of separate but equal segregation. And the court looked at that and said, you know what, we were wrong all along.
Yeah. Everybody kind of agrees on that. And it's an interesting thing. One of the things that I wonder about is, again, Congress, why not just look, they write legislation, they have the checkbook. Why not just fund open access to RU 486? Let's just, hey, reproductive rights. Here you go. And promote this angle. Because I don't think there's as much of a problem with the morning after pill as there is with, when the abortion can happen. Is day 0? Okay, maybe, but not that many people are there. But, and we're removing all the exceptions from this, some kind of health problem, whatever. But I want to have an abortion because I'm not prepared or whatever it is. That when argument is really tough. And so why not just approach this from a different angle and say, anybody who wants RU 486, dudes, here's a for RU 486. You guys can agree right afterwards. Hey, this happened. We don't want to have a kid. Let's take this pill right now and be done with it.
Well, I would be against that, and a lot of pro-lifers would be against it. And I think, there would still be a lot of opposition to that in Congress. But that being said, this is the whole point of why you get rid of Roe, right? Is to have those debates in the political, in the political system, because fundamentally different states are going to reach different conclusions. The federal government can reach different conclusions on different issues, to the extent that it has powers. It can decide it'll fund this and not fund that. And because there's no question that, look, as a matter of principle, right? As a matter of principle, once you get outside of the very, very specific question of when does conception occur, right? Which is, as a matter of principle, at a certain point, you're either dealing with a human life or not, right?
Right.
But public opinion is often not that principled, and often willing to accept unprincipled, and it's often willing to accept unprincipled compromises because, you've got people who haven't thought things through. You have people who operate for, various instinctive senses of justice and whatnot. And this drives, people who are really committed in politics nuts. Yeah. But the reality is that, restrictions on abortion are much more popular the further along you get in pregnancy. I mean, the the Democrats kind of absolutist Roe position of abortion all the way to crowning is wildly unpopular.
Yeah.
Whereas they point to polls that like, oh, people don't want a total ban on abortion and stuff, and that is, look, for pro-lifers, that's a much tougher case because once you start getting into like the morning after and stuff, it's a much tougher case to sell to the public. But I think from a pro-life perspective, I mean, to me, the model for the pro-life movement is the anti-slavery movement. And I think if you look at that movement, it's a movement that it took a lot of time to persuade people. And obviously you ended up, persuading people at gunpoint and then some. But the point is that the political development of the anti-slavery movement, it required you to get a stable base in a number of states first, right? The free states. And then there were fights over, what could and couldn't be done at the federal level. But it was a multi-pronged movement that involved, just as is true of the civil rights movement, right? Or a lot of other successful political movements where, you had some states on your side, you worked through public opinion, you worked through mass movements, you worked through various angles to try to persuade people, but you had to accept that you weren't always going to get 100% of what you wanted right out of the gate, right? And the political system is designed for that, for compromise, for incrementalism, and a lot of constitutional law doesn't work that way. It's it's supposed constitutional law is supposed to be principled, right? And so, but then the idea is that the things that are decided in a way that is principled are supposed to be things that everybody has sufficient agreement on, taking them away from the average guy on the street and his his messy moral compass, and handing them to a bunch of people in robes.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. The one of the questions I always think about is when I think about the court and having there be 9 people on it, it was all well and good. There was very little machinations about what happened. There's plenty of stuff that happens, but it's not as tumultuous as it is now, that the political nature of the court has swung the other direction. And for whatever reason, for however many decades, it was in one direction, and that was fine. We all accepted that. Now that it's changed, it's like every decision ever made either didn't exist or is going to be overturned. And I just don't understand the hyperbole around the nature of the court. I mean, look, it's gone the other way, just like it does in the House and the Senate and the executive branch. I mean, all the way through our government, it tends to wander a little bit. So why are we so crazy about this? Why does the court have to belong to a political party? And why is the politics involved in the court at all? I mean, I understand why. You don't have to answer that question, but
well, I mean, I think first of all, abortion really has driven a lot of that, right? I think the fever pitch surrounding the court has been much greater as a result of Roe, right? And it's been the elephant in the room, which makes it kind of funny to see that now that a lot of critics of this opinion are running around saying, "Oh man, this is going to lead to worse things," and it's like, I mean, certainly for conservatives, we're looking at this like, wait a minute, this is the big game, right? This is the this is the mountaintop. This is where we've been trying to get to the whole time. But this is not like, there's some secret plan. Oh, then we're going to like abolish interracial marriage or something,
right?
Like that. There's not even a political constituency for that. But it's like, like this is the big game. But look, I think frankly there is in the progressive movement a fair amount of sort of sense that they're supposed to own certain institutions, and so they can't really tolerate. And I think they have particular difficulty with the court because it's an elite institution, right? And so it's one thing to look at the White House with Donald Trump in it and be like, well, okay, that guy's a populist Yahoo, but like we own the all the big brain institutions with the smart people who went to the right schools, right? So maybe even if the presidency gets in the hands of some carnival barker, we own the elite institutions. We own the elite professions, the universities, the legal profession, and the fact that the whole legal profession at some level has to bend its knee to the court, right?
Yeah.
That the court stands at the top of that, and the idea that a majority of that is, people of a basically conservative jurisprudential and political bent, I think really, really rankles.
I just want to mention to put a link up here. Dan did a fantastic history of slavery. And so some of this knowledge he's talking about comes directly from that research in that paper. And he did a show with us on it. And in that show are the links to the National Review article he did. It's really fantastic and interesting stuff. What we want slavery to be, what we want abortion to be. These things don't typically line up with what we know. And we quickly run out of intelligence on these hard topics because we just get locked in on our one thing. Equal protection under the law, right? With abortion, we're struggling with that, and we're trying to figure out when is that life a life, and we completely leave out the fact that it takes two genders to create a baby. And you see posts all the time: if you have a penis, shut up. However, dudes have rights, and so you have the right to say, "Hey, I don't want to be a dad," or "Hey, I'd like to be a dad," which is the hardest position of all. Hey, lady, I want to be a dad. Well, you don't get to be. Well, I guess I don't get to be it. And there's a legitimate.
It's kind of a little late for that at a certain point,
Yeah.
I mean, look, yeah. I mean, men have rights and responsibilities in this area, and
yeah.
and look, I think the certainly the social conservatives, I think, need, not that we haven't done this, but need to continue stressing the fact that, like, look, a proper moral society is one where men take responsibility for their children.
Right.
And that this goes into a broader ethic of all of that. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, and I mean, I just reject the whole idea that, like, certain people don't get a say.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are always, on any issue, there are always some people who deserve a little more say because they have a little more skin in the game.
Right.
And that's always the case. It's young men who go to war. It's the business owners who understand how, tax and wage benefit, in any issue, there's people who are a little more in the center of things. And so we give them a little more, but I mean, I just reject the idea that, like, oh, if this doesn't, if this doesn't affect you personally, like if there's an injustice going on somewhere that doesn't hurt you personally, you should just turn the other way to it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, we live in a democracy. We all get a say on everything.
Yeah.
And issues of life and death are absolutely something that everybody should be involved in, and everybody should be heard on.
And it turns out we do have a say. Even if we're dudes, we have a say in how this goes. And I know for a long time, one of my main discriminators was if a person was anti-abortion. I was like, I just can't. I can't vote for that person. Not because I'm super stoked about abortion, but, and it's the thing I can't wrap my head around. Maybe you can help me with this. Like handguns, abortion exists, and they're going to happen. And what I don't want is have my daughter deciding she wants an abortion and going to Mexico or some dude's garage who's doing, hey, I'll do an abortion no matter what. How do we protect those young people who don't have the ability to go to their parents and say, I need to get an abortion, or I need to deal with the fact that I'm pregnant right now and I'm 14 or 13 years old. These are these young teenagers that get pregnant. That's who I worry about. And I know that they're going to find a way to deal with it. I don't want some girl drinking Comet and killing herself because she didn't want to have a kid, So how do we deal with that aspect of it if we're going to have a rational society, and the fact that abortions exist and have always existed? There's always been ways around that. So what do we do?
Well, I mean, I don't think you have. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to have the illusion that making something illegal is going to eliminate it completely. I mean, we haven't eliminated murder, we haven't eliminated rape, we haven't eliminated robbery, and that's particularly true when it's sort of demand-driven things, whether it's drugs, prostitution, illegal immigration, illegal guns.
Yeah.
And so you have to have an enforcement system that has some recognition of the fact that that when you ban things, some of them are still going to happen. On the other hand, it seems to me it's kind of bizarre for people to suggest that banning abortion won't affect the number of abortions. Um, I mean, in any area, we understand that when you make things illegal, you do get less of them. You may
Right.
not get as much less of them as you would like, but you do get less of them.
Yeah.
If we made cocaine legal, there would be more people would take cocaine, right? I
Right.
mean, look at pot. Uh, you cannot. I mean, you go down to Manhattan. You cannot walk down any street without smelling pot.
Right.
Now that was not
Yeah.
true 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And does that mean nobody was smoking pot in New York City 15 years ago? Of course not. People
Yeah.
were smoking pot in New York City. They were growing it in their apartments and stuff, but under little lamps. But you make it legal, you get more of it. So I mean, yeah, it's going to be the challenge is how do you deal with the various situations, right? How do you deal with balancing sort of the conservative view of small government and personal responsibility with the fact that you're going to have more people, more particularly young women who are in need of help. Obviously, private charity, in the church, crisis pregnancy centers, and all of that can step up. But, I mean, look, I think states are going to have to wrestle with these issues. But I mean, fundamentally, though, you start from the perspective that no abortion is a safe abortion, right? Because in your best case scenario, you have one death.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's something to that, and it's invasive enough that things can happen. I mean, people die from facelifts, so it would be unfortunate. One of the things that we've seen is the political encouragement to move somewhere. Like California, everybody's leaving to go to Idaho, Tennessee, and Texas, sometimes Florida, right? These are the destination states because they have a grass is greener political view. Do you see this being the case? Like if Roe v. Wade is overturned and it's kind of thrown back to the states, do you see this being a thing where, like, I guess Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, is like, come on, we're going to have abortions out here. Do you see this being a thing where we're competing for people to move and businesses to transition because abortion is in somewhere, another legal or illegal or partially either one?
I mean, New York is even talking about basically handing out taxpayer money to like chauffeur people to the state and stuff to have abortions. It's crazy, but I mean, look, I think it's interesting because I think the most visible example we got of that was during COVID, right? When you had all these people moving into the freer states. I don't think that overturning Roe is going to be a revolution in that regard, but I think it accelerates this sorting where more and more people are finding that they just can't tolerate living in a red state anymore, or living in a blue state anymore.
Right.
And I don't think that's healthy for the country, but it maybe is healthier in some ways for local communities to have people living together who can tolerate each other. So, but I mean, I think what's hard for progressives to deal with is the idea that this whole structure exists at all, right? That you can have parts of the country that are outside their reach, that are just going to go their own way, that you can't just get like 5 corporate CEOs in a room to say, you know what, we're going to boycott the states that do this until they all fold.
Yeah.
And part of that is the fact that having a couple of it's like having anchor tenants in in a mall. You talk about like right now, Florida and Texas are kind of your anchor tenants, right? As long as those states stay red, there's a lot of business, a lot of customers. If you can't boycott those 2 states out of a policy, then that gives the medium-sized states, Georgia and North Carolina, and your smaller, as you get down the road to Tennessee and Missouri, and it gives other states somebody to hide behind.
Yeah. Right now we're running a surplus here in California, tens of billions of dollars in surplus. And then I drive through, Sacramento, Oakland, LA, and I'm like, please spend some money on one, cleaning up graffiti. Don't quit calling it street art. Like they're painting everything. Art is art. That's fine. but writing your name on something is not art. And there is just like Oakland is a completely feral city. So here we are bragging about our surplus, and God, don't even get me going on San Francisco. These places are dumps, and they have people in desperate need of. If the government is going to be good and we're going to be progressive out here, we're going to help people. What on earth are we doing? You know,
I mean,
and so
even the mayor of San Francisco now is starting to talk like somebody
yeah,
who knows they're the mayor of a dump.
it is bad, man. They in Oakland, I saw that the third rail that protects you from being electrocuted. They hopped a barbed wire fence to go up to the third rail to spray. If that isn't the ultimate FU to authority, I don't know what it is. Like
That's
this
like
fence,
the FU to common sense at a certain point, though.
yeah, right. That's how wild this is, and there's no stopping it. There's no common sense, and we're getting. I don't know what common sense is. We all talk about it, but then you're like, how do I define it? I don't know. But it seems like things like this, this leak, don't lead to good things. It leads to, I don't know, very divisive things. I'm not sure what the answer is on Roe v. Wade. I'm glad to have those very smart people think about this legally, and then again throw it like they're inclined to do. Throw it back to the states if they don't. If they don't do it. And I want to add another wrinkle into this. When I talk to my friends who are left leaning, they look at the court and they're always like, they're going to overturn this, they're going to overturn that. But they never read the decision to understand why it went one way or the other. And if it goes their way, they never file that away as like, hey, the court tends to favor equal protection under the law. It continues to expand certain, rights as we try to pick these little nits out of our legal system. They completely lose track of the fact that gay marriage did come through the court, or you can't fire a person for having a different sexual orientation. I mean, the court easily and legitimately could have kicked that back to the House and said, hey, figure this out for yourselves. This law was written a long time ago. We're a different place, but they didn't do that. So what do you make of all of that?
I mean, look, I do think that the court has, obviously the court's personnel has shifted since even those two decisions, but
right.
It is certainly true that social conservatives have lost a lot more battles than they've won at the court, even in, the last 10, 15 years.
Right.
And at the same time, look, I mean, the court is now a conservative court across the board. There is something to be said for the idea that the court was a conservative court on certain business issues, for the last 30 years, that the court was a conservative court on some law enforcement issues as far back as the 70s. So it does shift in different issue sets. But I mean, outside of the really hot button cases, you do have a lot more agreement. I mean, even these days, the court still, most of its, the largest category of votes on the court are 9-0 cases. So there's still a lot of those, or cases that are 8-1 or 7-2. So, and the court, I think the court is institutionally much more sympathetic in general to, protecting individual rights. As a class, even if it may not recognize sort of rights that seem exotic or kind of made up. But, once you get into the sphere of, okay, I'm making a free speech claim, a free exercise of religion claim, a right to bear arms, a right to be free of self-incrimination, those things, the court is pretty protective of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently had an author on who did a history of the court, also recommended another one called Scorpions. And the court, outside of politics, has spent a lot of times, like back when George Washington was president, he'd pick a guy and they'd be like, I'll do it for a little while. I got other things to do though, George. And they weren't all that interested in like the lifetime aspect of it. And then the court changes again and it evolves again. Is this even a big deal, this leak, and even Roe v. Wade? Is this even going to matter? I mean, in a world where we were so pissed at whatever, hashtag believe her and hashtag this and this existential crisis. Oh my gosh. Like, does this even matter? Or were we talking about something totally different in 2 weeks?
I think this will matter inside the court for a lot longer than that.
Okay.
And the reality is that we are now no longer in a world where, I think the 60s was kind of the last time when you would have people who would actually leave the court to do something else.
Right.
I mean, now you have justices who maybe, they choose a time to retire and maybe they have a reason for that. Justice O'Connor, for example, stepped down in part because she, her husband, I think, had Alzheimer's. And, but even there, she was kind of politically timing it so that a Republican could replace her. But because the justices are apt to be more longer tenured these days, I think an event like this that sort of breaks the bonds of trust within the court is going to resonate there a lot longer. Which is also, I think, why it's very unlikely to me. I mean, I could imagine maybe Sotomayor, but it's very unlikely to me, I think, that any of the justices were behind the leak as opposed to a clerk. Because I think the justices all understand they got to work with each other. They got to live with each other for a very long time.
And like you said, they're pretty good at getting along, if not friends often. Benjamin Barton was the author I was trying to think of. He wrote a fantastic book.
Yes.
And I'll put a link in for
that.
Yeah,
I was on that show and actually reviewed reviewed his book then after that for National Review.
Yeah. And so there are people that spend time writing about this at great length and with fantastic things. And everybody should just, if you want to complain about the court, you owe it to yourself to understand the court a little bit, some of where it's been and everything. Which made me forget my question. So let me plug this. Look, Dan writes for the National Review. So go to National Review. There's a link right there below us. Go there and check out his writing. I think you guys will dig what he does. If you want to support the Break It Down Show, of course, go to breakitdownshow.com. Click on the PayPal link or on the store link or shop on Amazon link. There's a lot of ways to support, but that PayPal link is the best way to do it. So always click and subscribe, and those things help tremendously. We've talked a lot about all of this stuff and kind of ventured out into some different topics. What in general thoughts do you have that we've not covered in terms of the leak and Roe v. Wade and what's next for the court?
I mean, the most interesting, one of the most immediately interesting things to me is what does this do to the timetable, right? Because normally the court wraps up its term the last week of June. Maybe, they always try to get out of town by the 4th of July, right?
Yeah.
So roughly by like June 30th, July 1st, they're done. Probably June 30th this year because I think it's a Wednesday. And normally the biggest cases of the term come down right then. So you would have assumed that the Dobbs case, unless they got rid of it on some technical ground, that if they were going to do something big like overturning Roe, that would be probably the last case of the term. But because of the leak and because of the pressure that is created on the court, it seems possible that they might decide it much earlier than that. They might, it seems to me, if I was Chief Justice Roberts, that's what I would do. I would sit everybody down and be like, look, we don't want to live like this for the next 2 months, right? People camping out on everybody's yards and whatnot. And all of this glare at the leaked draft. Is it the opinion? Isn't it the opinion? So let's just everybody sit down, finish your opinions, finalize the draft, finalize whatever Roberts is writing, finalize the dissents, and get them out the door. The court hasn't yet set when its next decision date is going to be. Usually at least a few days ahead of time, they'll announce that. And they have 37 other cases left on their docket, including some big ones. They've got a big gun rights case from New York, and some other stuff going on, some big immigration cases. So, to the extent that the looming investigation and the looming leak controversy is making it harder for them to get all the other cases done, that would be another reason why they might well end up trying to push this out in the next 2 weeks. But that to me is an interesting thing that would be, that bears watching, and that I think that people who watch the court closely are watching extra closely now to see, when are they going to hand down decisions again, and if they do, is Dobbs going to be there? Is this going to delay them in getting other decisions out while they're trying to trying to resolve this, because we don't know from the outside also just how disruptive this investigation is. Did they have everybody in, just talk to everybody once and they go home, or do they have investigators pulling the place apart, grilling everybody about, who they live with and where they, what printers they use and everything? It could be much more disruptive than it appears from the outside.
Yeah. Well, and what we know about these investigations is often, like, look, the federal government went after Barry Bonds for using steroids, and for a minute, they proved that he was an asshole. And then even that went away. So, I mean, like, these things are frustratingly endless and don't give you what you want. The Trevor Bauer case, which, I'm always interested in, they just came back and suspended him for 2 years. And he's like showing the texts on his YouTube channel. Here is the text from the person they're talking about. Like, you cannot tell me that this investigation in any way represents a reality that, like, just open this thing up. So should they just open this all up, all of it? The Supreme Court, just be completely transparent and be like, as we go through these processes, hell, you can look at the Google Doc as we do this thing. You can't edit it, but you can look at it or whatever. I don't know. Is it better just to open this up?
I think the answer is that, if anything, this will really harden the court against more transparency. It will harden them against cameras in the courtroom. It will probably cause them to take additional precautions in how they handle opinions, because I think they really don't like this and they're not enjoying it.
Is it also not it's got to be part of their job, whether it's legal or not, to withstand? I mean, it's a pretty cakey gig to go and be a Supreme Court justice or a clerk for them. I mean, they have to be able to withstand some people sitting on their lawn or on the street with some signs for a while, right? Especially if they're going to weigh in on, I mean, they take these cases and there are very few hard parts outside of the work itself that Supreme Court justices have to endure.
I mean, certainly we expect them to have courage, right? I mean, they're given judicial independence, life tenure for that purpose. And that goes all the way back to, you could read Hamilton and the other founders about why they gave them life tenure. And that's exactly what they're talking about. The absolute and inflexible adherence to the rights in the Constitution. So we expect them to deal with this. At the same time, I don't think it's necessarily fair to expect them to deal with people camping out in front of their houses. I mean, I think that's an unhealthy thing to have, for congressmen or presidents. Well, the president gets his own house at taxpayer expense, so he could deal with it because they're not all that close to his front door. But
he's got phalanxes and a security fence. And
I mean, look, I think it's totally reasonable when you walk to work at the Supreme Court to have to go past demonstrators, because that's part of the job. But not necessarily your home. I did that always, anytime I see that with anybody in politics or business, I go into, sort of Michael Corleone, like, this is, my home where my children play with their toys.
Yeah. Well, and like that whole nonsense of shouting down people when they're eating dinner in public, that's just a crime. You don't have a right to assault someone like that and spit into their food. Oh God, now it's a tip of the murder weapon if we did that these days. So, I mean, silly, but it just everybody's got to calm down a little bit. We'll work through this problem. It's a problem we've had to work through. We'll still have to work through it after that, because we're pretty nicely divided on this thing. It's not going to be resolved here. It's going to move on to the next thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this will close it. Do you think we'll get to a resolution with Roe v. Wade becoming something else if it does get overturned?
Well, I think if they overturn this, given the personnel on the court, quite likely that is the end of Roe. Because I think it would be a long time probably before the court is ready to, and it would really, really be bad for the institution to overturn a decision and then have new personnel come back and say, no, wait, we're bringing it back, and we're just making it all up as we go along. But ending it for the court is only the beginning, right? It's as Churchill said, the end of the beginning, right? And it's where the political system settles, it's going to take a long time, and there's going to be a lot of fighting over it. Like a lot of other controversial things in politics.
Yeah.
It's going to be working through state legislatures and Congress and the federal and state executive branches for a lot of years. So this is not the end.
Oh, dang it. This next existential crisis teed up right now. Tea time in 10 minutes. One of the things that strikes me as disingenuous is like we have this adoration of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she's done absolutely incredible things, and she deserves all of those things. But when you watch the documentary for Clarence Thomas, beautifully shot, what a wonderful story. You have this brilliant old man who sought to conquer English. His grandpa says, "Don't ever slip up once." Clarence changes his mind one time, and he's like, "You're out of the house." Cripplingly poor, and people despise this man. And it's like, he's got a mixed ethnicity marriage. He's done all these things. You don't have to agree with all of it, but there's zero respect and zero admiration for this guy who is the ultimate American story. I mean, he went and to Joe Biden's face said this is a public lynching. And basically nobody knows that story. It can't fathom how we are so like awesome. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I can appreciate who she is, and I think she's fantastic. Watching her work out and everything. But why do we despise Clarence Thomas so much?
I think this is something that pervades both sides of the political aisle, but again, I think is more exaggerated, certainly with progressives, and particularly kind of the sort of progressives who are online or dominate the entertainment space and whatnot. I think they just have a much harder time with giving any respect whatsoever to somebody they disagree with.
Right.
On the other hand, look, there is a long tradition of this in American politics.
Sure.
I mean, there was certainly a time when, you were an Adams man or a Jefferson man, and, by God, you were not going to say a good word about the other one. So
yeah.
Maybe, there's a certain amount of that is healthy in a democracy, that we need heroes and villains. But I think what it does prove, though, is that you just can't take at face value all of the high hosannas that are given to somebody like Ginsburg or to Ketanji Brown Jackson for this is a big historic thing. Okay, yeah, but if you disagreed with her, you'd be burning her in effigy, right? So
yeah.
it's like yeah, okay, you're telling me the good stuff about her, but that's not what really matters to you about her, is it?
Yeah. No, I agree. Whoever they pick, that person is going to be fantastic. And like Benjamin talked about in his book, maybe we ought to pick some folks who don't have these very similar backgrounds, or like Neil Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, basically were like in the same office all the time. Like maybe, I don't know, maybe get some different justices to, to create some actual parity in the court, in some different life experiences. Having a bunch of blue bloods or people who worked in blue blood spaces may not be the best long-term approach to it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Alito, I think now will be with Breyer's retirement. Alito will be the only military veteran left on the court.
Yeah, there you go. Like, see, these are some of these things we have to fix. All right, anything in closing?
I'm just staying tuned. I mean, look, obviously, I believe that that Roe is nonsense and should go, and that the court will get a lot of this stuff out of its hair by doing that and having the courage. I hope they do have the courage to stick to their guns and not change the decision just because there's public pressure. But I think, I do also hope that we get that the leaker is exposed, because I think that the leak is bad for the court. And I think if the net result is that this gets swept under the rug or never found out, and that we're still arguing 10 years from now about who done it, I don't think that will be terribly healthy either. Or even if it's like a Mark Felt situation where it's somebody on their deathbed, we finally find out, 27 years later who it was.
Yeah, I definitely will have a lower opinion of the court if they don't, produce the body. Let's habeas that corpus. Let's get it done. Let's find out who it is, and then look, not cancel that person forever. Give them whatever is coming to them. But let's just figure it out and move on. I mean, my trust in FBI, CIA, whatever, all those organizations, the House, are you kidding me? My instead of discriminating on abortion, I now just discriminate on all incumbents. Got to go. I kick them all out. I vote against all of my incumbents because I just don't believe in what they do. All right, let me wrap this thing up.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. That money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you